In this clip, we are going to have a look at Metropolitan, which focuses on raising 5 million equity financing through a listing of Metropolitan Limited. Right, now very important at the top there of the question, Metropolitan Limited is a company which packs and distributes food stuff, and that you need to consider the impact of on the valuation of the company. Now you are given firstly a statement of financial position, and the equity here is very, very interesting. This is the only question where there's an issue sitting in that equity that is going to impact on the listing process here. Now, number one, there is share capital. Those shares in issue were issued in excess of the par value, and so a share premium arose in the past. That forms part of the equity for listing requirements. There's a non-distributable reserve. We assume here that the non-distributable reserve does not incorporate any revaluation surplus here. If it did, it would cause a problem here in terms of achieving the 50 million equity value, and so we're going to assume that in the absence of any information relating to that, that it does not relate to a revaluation surplus. But then the key issue, there is a retained loss here. So the one equity instrument or technique which Metropolitan could never consider here, should there not be 25 million shares in issue, is a capitalization issue. As Metropolitan has a retained loss, there are no surplus funds to capitalize in share capital. And so in this case, the only alternative to use to rectify the share capital of Metropolitan is to do a share split here. Right, now what additional information are we given? There is no intangible asset value, which is going to cause a problem for us in terms of the statement of financial position. And so heading down to the statement of profit or loss, you will see there that their profit for the most recent year is pre-tax 16 million. It exceeds the 15 million required for the listing requirements, and so we comply with that requirement. Remember, as mentioned in one of the previous clips, if the PI score here did not require Metropolitan to have been audited in the 3 most recent financial years, that is something that you would need to build in to your particular scheme for listing. Now, if you have a look there, they had made for the most recent year, they had a retained profit, so we might have a problem here with a 3-year profit history. What you would need to ascertain in this question is whether in the year before 20x7 they had made a loss only in that year, and that there were profits in the years before that, because then there wouldn't be a problem here. However, if there were losses in the years prior to 20x6, we could sit here with a listing dilemma. In the additional information that you will see there are only 5 million shares in issue. We will need to convert that, as mentioned, through a share split to 25 million, and so each share then would have a par value or capital value of R1.20 per share. Now, the problem that we have here is that all of the shares owned in Metropolitan Limited are owned by a trust. This trust owns 100% of the shares, and hence there are no shares owned by the public currently. Right, paragraph 3 contains very important information. That is, they want to raise 5 million rands worth of financing to buy into another company. This is the first example that you have in your question packs where the investment being invested into already yields a return. And that is that this investment into the competitor that they're going to acquire already yields an earnings for the most recent financial year of 750,000, and that is going to have a significant impact on the way in which we are going to value this investment. Right, and then to clarify the profit history is paragraph 4, and that is the loss can be isolated to 1 year, and that in the years before 20x6 there were in fact profits. And so we can assume then that collectively there is a 3-year profit history whereby the JSE would hopefully ignore the loss in 20x6. Right, and then paragraph 6 provides you with very crucial information. Remember what the core business of Metropolitan is. It is a food sector company but is unlisted. Given that its earnings yield and dividend yield, we assume it to be smaller than the existing listed companies, therefore having more risk, it would have a dividend yield or earnings yield in excess of 3.3% in respect of the dividend yield, or an earnings yield in excess of 10.1%. The overall JSE's dividend yield is 4.7%, but given that Metropolitan is a packager and distributor of foodstuffs, it would have a lower risk than the average overall listed company on the JSE. Hence, its dividend yield would be lower than 4.7%, or its earnings yield lower than 10.6%. So a dividend yield, if we value dividends, lying between 3.3% and the 4.7%, or an earnings yield in between 10.1% and 10.6%. And so the required is here to provide a method of listing and a scheme for listing, and to suggest a listing price on the assumption here that no discount applies. The 5 million in terms of paragraph 7 will be raised through, given that we do not have any public shareholding, through, in this case, we would have to go for a public offering as well as a placement, as 500,000 of the 5 million rand to be raised will be raised through an issue to the public. And so you will see in the solution begins weighing up the different listing methods or issue of shares which could be considered here. Now, a direct listing here is not possible, as Metropolitan does not comply currently with all of the listing requirements. They are going to do a placement of shares, as 500,000 of the 5 million will be raised through a placement with their suppliers. Right. However, the remaining 4.5 million rand could never be raised through a rights issue, as who would take up all the shares? The Ludic Trust. We need the public to take them up, and that would mean going through a public offering to the public through, in this case, we would have to then do an offer to subscribe. And so we're going to set a minimum share price through the valuation which follows. What is very critical here is we are going to take the existing earnings and value them at time point 0 by adding on the most recent year's returns for the acquisition, or that the company being acquired, the competitor, earned in its most recent year, being 750,000. So very important. The line item there referred to as expected net income of 14,006,000 is the total derived from the existing operations of Metropolitan plus the returns from the investment it is going to make. Based on the existing dividend payout ratio or dividend cover of Metropolitan, you would apply that then to arrive at what the dividend would have been, D0, please note, using the current dividend policy, and that results in a dividend, D0, of 3.501 million. Now remember, if we have dividend 0 or earnings 0, we could then value those using, in the case of a dividend, the dividend yield, or in the case of the earnings yield, or its inverse, the PE. Now, as I mentioned to you just now, you then could determine a dividend yield lying in between 3.3 and 4.7. So we took here a dividend yield of around about 4%, and an earnings yield could have been used to value the earnings of 14,006,000 Rand, using an earnings yield lying somewhere between 10.1 and 10.6, so probably in the region of about 10.3 or 10.4. And so the value of the shares then, capitalizing the dividend here of 3.5 million at a 4% dividend yield, results in a value of 87.5 million Rand. 5 million will be raised through the private placement and the public offering, which means that the existing shares have to be worth 82.5 million, and we know that after the share split there would be 25 million of them in issue. That results in each share being worth 3.50 Rand, and that would mean that the 500,000 shares issued, or Rand's worth of shares being issued to the supplier, we would issue at 3.50 Rand each, resulting in 142,858 shares being issued, and the public offering being the remaining 4.5 million Rands worth of shares, each being issued at 3.50 Rand, resulting in a 4.499 million shares, Rands worth of shares being issued to the public because of rounding, and that results in the following position. Remember, 25 million of the shares would be held by the Ludic Trust. They may only own a maximum of 80%, and so we, through an offer to subscribe, would not be able to list the company because there would not be a sufficient public shareholding yet. And so what we would need to consider here is, prior going to the public with an offer to subscribe, in this case, they would have to do an offer for sale whereby the Ludic Family Trust would need to reduce their shareholding from 25 million to 21.142 million, which would then facilitate the listing, and then only could they go to the public and offer the shares to the public to subscribe for shares here for that 1.285 million shares. So it is very important to always test whether your scheme complies with the listing requirements or not.